My name is Irwin Oostindie. I'm out here in Kwantlen Wanak territory with VOR Urban Labs, and just really thrilled to be able to welcome two sets of communities together into one event, and joined with Cease Wyss here on the West Coast, and Chelsey Schmidtke, also from VOR Labs, who's working with NUICC. Maybe Chelsey, you could just quickly introduce this convergence. Cease and I have co-hosted this gathering, the 8th Symposium, for several years, out here training arts and culture workers on the importance of showing up with resources and kind of getting in the way with resources and getting out of the way for Indigenous resurgence. And that's the work that we've done and trained several hundred arts administrators. But this being the last Friday of the month, NUICC has its Knowledge Mobilization Hub event, so it's a great time to work together with NUICC.
Yes, thanks, Irwin. Maybe I'll introduce myself first. So Nitsigatan Kehumigwen, Ochinia Big Stone Cree Nation, Treaty 8 Territory, Northern Alberta, Igwa, Vancouver, Niwigan, Unceded Coast Salish Territory. So my name's Chelsey Schmidtke. My family is from Northern Alberta, Big Stone Nation and Treaty 8 Territory on my mom's side and German on my dad's side. And I've been living and working and learning in Unceded Coast Salish Territory here in Vancouver for the last 10 years or so. I'm very happy to be working with the NUICC, the National Urban Indigenous Coalitions Council. They are a group, a network actually, of about 34 urban Indigenous coalitions from across Canada. So that's from St. John's, Newfoundland, to Victoria, Vancouver Island, to Pangertang and Nunavut, and everywhere in between almost every major Canadian city. And these organizations are coalitions of urban Indigenous service organizations, including friendship centers and many other organizations, as well as municipalities, police forces, health groups, all working towards better serving urban Indigenous people in their communities. And NUICC actually works as a national organization to uplift the voices and further the rights of urban Indigenous people across the country. So we're really pleased to be offering an event series called Governance Has Always, Stories Have Always Been Our Governance. And this is part of an ongoing series, this particular event, the one that we'll be talking about today, Building an Indigenous City, Decolonizing Cultural Policy, is part of that speaker series. So really pleased to partner with this group here for this event in Vancouver. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge our sponsors, Vancouver Moving Theatre and Heart of the City Festival. So if you're in the downtown east side, it's a beautiful festival. We're really grateful for their support, which provides the handshakes to our speakers and helps us do this good work. Cease, you're closer. I'm out in the Kwantlen territory. You're closer to the downtown east side. How are things from you this morning?
Hasquile eich tanoyap toitstanat queen quenshaman, Cease queen sna, and half and squallowin and wanaxton squallowin teetsits. Good day, everybody, from unceded Salish sea, lands, and waters here. I'm situated really close to where I'm really from. Love it. I'm right in the heart of where I'm from is what I should say. But yeah, I'm very close to what is now called Stanley Park, which is my family's origins, and Kanaka Ranch and so on. I'm a Squamish Indigenous woman from the Salish Sea here, and I'm also Stalo and Swiss and Hawaiian, and unceded artist working in unceded lands. It's a windy, blustery day, finally, I will say, because we've only had a week of rain, which for Vancouver in the fall is super sad. but now the leaves are well in action, and we're finally getting the weather we're supposed to get. And I think I'm my happiest when the rain hits in the fall. It starts to wash away all that colonial garbage and energy, and it feels good. So it's a good day to be Indigenous.
And Kamala Todd has had no light week this week with the beautiful work of UNDRIP activation in Vancouver. So maybe we'll be hearing little tiny threads of that along the way today. But really thrilled to have Kamala Todd again with us. She's done beautiful work with us in the past, both with the Symposium, but also with the NUICC knowledge mobilization program. So really grateful to have Kamala here for the next couple hours. So the first session is this conversation with our lovely guests who are on the front lines of building what we can talk about as being metaphorical in Indigenous cities in Canada, also in Santa Fe, New Mexico. But and then the second half, after our 10-minute lunch music break, Cease and I will be here to shepherd forward this work and help folks unpack what we've learned this morning. So really thrilled for folks. If you're with NUICC and not familiar with the Symposium, feel free to stay into the afternoon, but other folks who are from Vancouver are familiar with the program and will be with us from 12 noon till 2 p.m. So without any further ado, Kamala.
We're on. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Tanse, everyone. Thank you for including me in the circle. I always love being part of a circle, even a virtual circle. I'm definitely feeling the energy today, and thank you, Cease, for your good words. My sister, Cease, I'm actually calling in from the beautiful part of Cease's territory across the water, what's now known as Gibson's, Squamish territories. But myself, I actually grew up all over the lands and waters of the Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking people, now known as Metro Vancouver. So I definitely am really connected to this place and also appreciate the rain. And right now we've got like sun and rain creating that magical transformation together. There's steam and rainbows and all kinds of beautiful things. So it's a good day for a conversation together. I myself, as I said, I was born and raised throughout Metro Vancouver, but my own ancestors on my mother's side, Loretta Todd, the filmmaker who also lives over here now, we come from Cree Métis homelands, including St. Paul, the Métis settlement, Red River, Métis settlement, Lac La Biche, Turtle Mountain, and many places in between. And our family story is definitely one of displacement and loss and disconnection. Myself growing up in Salish territories and really not having a lot of those connections to the lands where my ancestors come from. Not learning the language that my grandfather spoke. He spoke Cree, but still finding ways in the city as we do to find connection and create circles and be part of Indigenous culture. And definitely I have a little bit of my own background and thoughts to share to get us going. And really I'm looking forward to hearing from Daina, Kevin, and Alan, and I'm really honored to be facilitating this conversation that's near and dear to my heart. Also want to mention that my dad is also German, Chelsey, so it's always nice to meet the German Indians, as some people said, and Kenny Starr has that in one of her songs, so we're a thing. So yes, thank you for this. I just want to quickly give some thoughts and perspective for myself, and then we're going to hear from each of the speakers, introduce themselves and their work and their reflections on the theme, and then just get into some conversation. And I imagine that there'll be time to hear from people in the room as well. So yeah, my own background, I kind of work at that weird intersection between filmmaking and urban planning or cultural planning. And kind of by mistake, I didn't necessarily plan to work in a colonial government, but fresh out of grad school, I got kind of roped into working for social policy, as it was called, social planning back then. And my boss at the time basically said, we really need to have help the city of Vancouver build relationships with the Aboriginal community, as it was called back then. And so I just thought, okay, I don't really know how any of this works, but I'll give it a shot. And so really, for me, I've witnessed this sort of very assimilative,
Might be a sketchy connection on the coast. So
oh no.
It just dropped out in the last minute of what you said.
Oh darn.
Yeah.
I usually have like the best tell us here.
Just a few seconds, but yeah,
But maybe, I don't know if it'll make a difference if I take off my Wi-Fi on this. Okay, well, just put it in the chat if somehow I've glitched out again, and then I'll know to repeat. But yeah, just generally speaking, that my role at the social planning was to build relationships with the Aboriginal community, and the city of Vancouver really had a very assimilative perspective on that, in terms of a pan-Indigenous, urban people are just people from other territories who have come to live here. And there really wasn't a sense of the diversity of the people and the nations that they come from, but also the fact that the city is on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. So that became really clear to me. And I think there was a lot of work to get away from that pan-indigeneity, which also erased the fact that the city is on Indigenous lands and will always be on Indigenous lands, and that the rights and title holders are still there. So I started to use the term Indigenous City to address that, to make sure that we go past this kind of, pan-Indigenous homogenizing idea of indigeneity in the city, to recognize that every North American city is an Indigenous city because it's on Indigenous lands. And what does that mean? And what does that mean for the people who have also been displaced or who have come here from other territories? And so I really explore a lot of that. Even though myself, I'm from what we call the urban Indigenous community, I'm very focused on the visibility and voice of the host nations, because I have a sense of responsibility and reciprocity to the people whose lands I have grown up on and am raising my children on, and that I love very dearly. So anyway, all this to say that that I have tried to address that sense of erasure and that sense of assimilative ideas of indigeneity in the city, in municipality, in City Hall, but through film and through storytelling. I was lucky to be able to do a lot of storytelling projects while working for the city. And then I actually then came back to work as the Indigenous Arts and Culture Planner. And so then I started to work on what I guess you call cultural policy. And so myself, I know Irwin for years has talked about cultural policy, and I still don't know what that means. I don't really, it's not a language that I'm familiar with. It's not a language that I speak or that I learned in school. And so even while I was working on the city's cultural plan, the new plan for the next however many years we made it for, 20 years, we called it Blanketing the City in Arts and Culture. So culture shift, blanketing the city in arts and culture. So even as I was working on a cultural plan and cultural policy, I could honestly say I still don't really know what cultural policy is. Because, and as I think about it, does that mean I'm just like ill-informed or, kind of dumb? But I think really what it is it's just a language that I don't speak. It's not how I look at the ways that we create and the ways that we transform and the ways that we tell stories and the ways that we, express our sense of connection to place and to the cosmologies and everything. And so I will keep working in that realm because it's the work that I care about in terms of trying to decolonize how the city continues to, impose itself onto these lands. But I will keep trying to do it in my own way and keep learning from people like Cease around the thousands of years of traditions that have been here, the thousands of years of stories that have been shared, and relationship to land, and I really see it as a responsibility. And so anytime I create film or curate or do projects like that, it's not just to do it, and it's not as a separate thing. It's as part of this interrelationship that we're all part of, and it's part of transformation that I truly believe in. And so I'm really interested, as we hear from the speakers today, and all of you who are in the room, to think about, what we carry, to use the term of a show that Cease and I are actually part of over here in Gibson's, is reflecting on what we carry as responsibilities, what we carry. For me, it would be in my bundles of medicine, you know, the gifts that we all carry, the pain, the joy, the love, all of it. But in, you know, creating, from my experience, every Indigenous artist that I've ever met, or person who works within this world, it is not just art for art's sake. It is always connected to something deeper. It is always about, you know, remembering our ancestors, thinking of the future, thinking, you know, wider and deeper. And so, you know, it's not to say that people also don't want to just get out there and make music and make art and do beautiful things, but that, you know, there's so much going on that I think the mainstream arts and culture world can learn from and make space for. So those are just some reflections on my mind this morning. And I'd love to turn it over to our incredible panelists to hear, you know, from very, very distinct, different backgrounds and areas of work, to just hear a bit about your own work and any reflections you might have on some of these early thoughts. Kevin has generously agreed to go first, so I'd love to turn it over to you. Hi.
Kamala, thank you. Nyadig Shinwenwen, Kevin Loring Henshquest. I'm Intlakatmak from Lytton First Nation in unsurrendered Intlakatmak territory in present-day British Columbia, just upriver there from the Musqueam territory and Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh. I'm living out here in Ottawa on the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, where I'm honored to make my living and raise my family out here, as I work at the National Arts Centre of Canada in the Indigenous Theatre Department. I am the Artistic Director of Indigenous Theatre out here at the NAC. I am also the Artistic Director of Savage Production Society, or Savage Society, based in Vancouver. Both companies, the NAC Indigenous Theatre and Savage Society, are mandated to tell Indigenous stories and to platform and elevate Indigenous artists. I founded Savage Society in Vancouver really because I needed a platform to stand on, and for myself and other Indigenous artists in Vancouver at the time, 20 years ago, there wasn't a lot of uptake. There wasn't a lot of interest as there is now in the stories that we wanted to tell. And so, we wanted to do it in the ways that we wanted to tell them. And so I founded Savage Society to be that platform for myself and for the other Indigenous artists that were in my circle at the time, to be able to you know, access the funds and the resources to be able to do the work that we want to do, instead of always sort of begging to be included in somebody else's house. And so that's kind of where the origin of Savage Society came from. And now, you know, my sort of like the motto that we've adopted here at the NAC is the motto that I've always carried: one foot on the stage and one foot in community. And so the work that we do here at the NAC is really a reflection of the work that I've been doing my entire career. Really privileged to be in this position here at the NAC, and that role, you know, an Indigenous theatre department that is embedded in the National Arts Centre of Canada, which is a very colonial space structure. The national stage, whatever the hell that means. It comes with a lot of, you know, there's a lot of positionality in that, right? There's a lot of being, I mean, our role here is really to make sure to take care of the artists that we bring in, the curation part of that. It's not just about like hiring, you know, the Indigenous artists to come and be here. You've got to take care of them and do it in a culturally respectful, culturally appropriate way, and to really be that Indigenous voice at the table at all of the decisions that we engage with here at the NAC. And so my art practice, I'm a playwright, I'm an actor, I'm a director, I'm also a documentarian. I have multiple projects. I like to make jewelry these days as a kind of a meditating, like a bead skulls, and I make like copper jewelry and things like that. It's really fun. It's sort of my meditative practice. But my true art practice is storytelling. And a lot of the work that I've done with Savage Society over the years has involved working in community, as well as working on the professional stage. And both of those roles are really important to me. I think that in a professional setting, like in a theater with the lights and the sound and all of the things that go around that, that's a kind of an elevated space. But I also take working in community very seriously, and have been doing, it's become one of the most important parts of my art practice, is working in community. And bridging those two worlds, and bringing the community to the city, and presenting work in theaters, and bringing urban Indigenous artists to the community, and having them share their skills with my home community in BC. And so that to say that I'm fundamentally at my core a storyteller, and I sit in these multiple worlds sort of simultaneously, and feel it's a real responsibility for my teams in both companies to really nurture and take care of the artists with a care forward sort of mentality about them as beings and what they have to offer, and how they share, and do it in a way that is that centers story sovereignty, Indigenous story sovereignty. It's really a centerpiece of my art practice. So Cookstown, thank you so much for inviting me to be here on this panel. It's beautiful to see all these lovely faces. And Cookstown, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Some really good things to help inspire our conversation later. Especially love that idea of having begging to be included. So please keep that in mind. Those in the room who are part of the kind of mainstream, and also might be in a position of funding, and what that can look like. And obviously the importance of sovereignty is such an important point that you raise as well, that I hope we can talk about. Thank you very much. So Daina, I know we talked about the alphabetical. Alan had asked for a little time of listening. So are you good to?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm cool to go.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kamala. Tansei, everybody. And I just want to say thank you to Irwin and his amazing group of people for inviting me. It's really an honor to kind of be back in Vancouver, even though reporting live from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Yeah, I just from the Montana Cree Nation, Treaty 6. So it's nice to hear somebody's from Treaty 8. No, they're Albertans here. And I grew up off reserve. I did not grow up on a reserve. I was adopted. I always just kind of preface that because a lot of the work I did was kind of, when I started curating, it was from a very kind of, I don't know, aware perspective of not really knowing my family history until I was probably getting well into my 20s and reconnected with my birth family. So, but by that point, I'd already gone through art school and had all these amazing experiences, which the most impactful one at the beginning was working with Grunt Gallery, which quite a few of us have had really great working relationships with. For those who don't know who Grunt Gallery is, it's an artist-run center in Vancouver, a very prominent one, and it is not a Native organization by the funding standards, but the way they approach community and just their open-mindedness and their support, they are kind of an Indigenous organization. They've had such amazing outlook on really supporting artists within Vancouver and curators like myself. So I'm gonna try and show some images. This might get a little crazy because I'm going back and forth between presentations. So this says U of L presentation, but I'm stealing images from a past presentation, but just to kind of look at some of the work I had started with Grunt Gallery. I had just finished art school at Emily Carr, and I was very fortunate to run into Archie Pachowis, who other people have also worked with. I had met him as a kid, and we had reconnected later on when he was working with the Roundhouse Community Center. And so he invited me to be a part of Grunt, which was really amazing. I hadn't finished art school yet, but I was fortunate enough to get into a class where I was credited with my volunteer time at a gallery. So Glenn Alteen was he was the director at the time, and he was very inviting to have this kid out of art school join them. And so thanks to the County Council for the Arts, because I've had some really great curatorial residencies supported through their program. And that's how I got funded to stay with Grunt for the first year out of art school and work with them. And the lead up to the residency was that I would put on my first exhibition as a curator. I had started doing my own arts practice, but once I fell into curating, it just was headlong, and I kind of just, all the art training had kind of gone by the wayside, and I was really interested in the things to learn at Grunt, including performance art, which was really amazing. I hadn't really known much about that side of art making at the time. So a lot of the works I was looking at, like I said, I was very hesitant on how much I would bring in traditional practices or spiritual practices, but just learning through Grunt and how they approach programming that kind of bridged both, like all of those, contemporary art, Indigenous art, cultural practice, all that. It was just really exciting, and I just learned so much on how to be very careful and cognizant of how to kind of include things, but be respectful of cultural practices or spirituality that might be not so much in a cultural or spiritual place, but or space, but having artists really work with these ideas. So this is one of the first projects I did with Kevin McKenzie and Barb Michon. Yeah, they were just really using kind of more, like that, like I had titled the elements of tradition. There was all these elements of these cultural practices coming with it through their work that I just thought, this is really interesting, and how, the kind of more contemporary materials, but still kind of also bringing their background and practices to the forefront. One of the second projects, a couple of years later, I got permanently hired with Grunt, which was really amazing. And I had worked with Sonia Sue and Peter Morin a lot leading up into this point, because we all graduated art school together and we all went out to the art world together. And we're still hanging out in the art world together after all these years. But we decided we really wanted to put on this exhibition looking at regalia. So I feel like this is kind of one of the projects where I was really kind of I was worried about like the response using like button blankets and drums and things that were very more objects from kind of more traditional aspects of Indigenous culture. And but it was really great. There was a really great response to it. I really like the fact that Sunny had this playful idea of using animation. Peter's always been very, very aware of his background, and that he's Tahltan from the north in BC. And yeah, it was just really interesting how he used the emblems or the symbology from Tahltan culture on these business suits. So he was trying to bridge, the idea of modern Indigenous life in the city with this traditional background. So all three of the coats have these really great crow, because he's Crow clan, have these crow emblems all over the jackets. So moving on from there very quickly, because I know it's a pretty short time that we have here. I worked at Grunt Gallery for quite a few years, and in 2010 I left for the National Gallery of Canada, which was really an amazing experience. I don't have any images from that exhibition here. I was looking for them this morning, but I couldn't find them. But it was really, I think what was really great about working in Vancouver is just being aware of, I'll let somebody in. Just let somebody into the talk. Okay, I gotta figure out how I gotta get back to these screens here now. Stop share. Okay, there you go. Yeah, so I feel like because I was Cree from Alberta, I was always very aware that, you know, I was a guest on like West Coast lands. And I've always really carried that awareness into other places that I've worked, especially in Ottawa. I feel like all 4 cities, there's always been, they all have had, seems like a meeting location of many different nations coming together, especially in Ottawa, just because it's the massive city that our nation city. But yeah, just knowing that, you know, the Inuit were coming through a lot there, all the different host nations that surround Ottawa, and just everybody that comes to visit, especially if you go for Canada Council grants, if you're getting a grant or if you're on a grant selection committee, there's always lots of people going in and out of Ottawa. So it's kind of transient that way with just seeing a lot of amazing artists and curators and academics coming to visit the city. So so they really feel like Vancouver is very integral to that outlook on that perspective on how to, you know, be respectful and approach really great ideas about who's there and how to work with people and community. I was there for about 17 months, and then I got the amazing opportunity to work with Grand Gallery, or sorry, Urban Shaman. I'm always screwing them up back and forth. So I was working at Urban for over 10 years. I just left this year in April to come down to Santa Fe. And I just thought I'd show you one integral. It's not actually my curatorial programming, but I really feel like, oh boy, no, it's not going to pop up here. I really feel like it's important to bring up because it's probably many people have heard about it, Walking with Our Sisters. I think it just was a really great way for me to understand how to really bring in community. I'm sorry if I'm making everybody dizzy here. Here we go. Can you guys see that? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I really love this project. And Christy Belcourt is the brainiac behind it. And it's just to honor missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, transgendered as well. And we were the sorry?
We're just showing the file folder, not the
Oh,
image.
okay, it's not showing. How do I get the
Click on
image to pop up here? Trying to see.
Maybe you
Just to double click it.
Double click
You
it?
might have to unshare your screen and then share.
Okay,
it
I'll
again.
try it one more time here. Oh, there we go. Now can you
Yay.
see it? Okay. It's so confusing. Okay. And so we were the 4th venue for Walking with Our Sisters, and they really had started kind of formalizing how they were going to tour this incredible, beautiful, emotional project around everywhere, including the States, all over Canada for many, many years. And it was really interesting how Christy approached it, just in the fact that, it's like almost like a healing project as well for all these families and people who have gone through the experience, and for all of us that, are very aware of this issue that's incredibly hurtful and emotional and just really sad. But having the beauty of all these vamps that people are invited to create vamps. And for those who don't know what a vamp is, it's the top part of the moccasin that gets sewn onto to hold the bottom part on. And families are invited, anybody was invited to submit. And I think in the end, they almost did somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 pairs of vamps in the end. And they were all different. They were color coded, which is really nice. Christy was so incredible at figuring out how to have these variations of color within the vamps, as you can see. There's a still of it. But the lead up to this project, they really wanted to make sure that we were keeping care of people, triggering them if they've been dealing with this issue in their family. And, this is really intense subject matter to bring up, and to, bring up all those memories and, anger and sadness and stuff. So, so what they asked of us, the committee asked us if we would hold conversations leading up to the exhibition, just to keep people aware that this was coming to Winnipeg. They could share their thoughts. We could have discussion forums on, how to kind of move forward in a very gentle and healing way with this project. And it was really great because we didn't invite people to the gallery. We tried to really make, go to spaces where there was already Indigenous people gathering within the city, within the urban city setting. And it was really great. We managed to kind of hit a whole different audience than we normally would have at that time, because a lot of the people that frequented Urban Shaman were very based from the art world, contemporary art world. And it was a very diversified audience that we had at the time, but we really wanted to make sure that people from outside the reserves, outside the city, were aware that this was happening and that they could come and join and be part of the project. So, so I really felt like it was a really great way to make sure that we had those people there and that we had the families there to honor them and stuff. And we also made sure that we had elders on every day to deal with any kind of emotional disruption that might have happened for people. We had smudging, which I'm not sure how other people have dealt with this or have had this experience, but within our building, there's, building codes about, burning things, and our neighbors, the other business neighbors, were kind of complaining about the smell, and it was kind of awful because they were thinking, I thought we were smoking weed. And we're like, no, this is actually a traditional practice. And it was really great because we had all these elders there all the time. And when things started to get kind of friction between us and the neighbors, I would just send the elders out. They were my backup crew, and they're just like, can you please go and help and talk to these people and explain? And of course, when they see this group of, old ladies coming towards them, of course, they're going to be super nice and let them have their say. But in the end, it was really great. The elders smoothed it over for us and invited them to come up and see what we were doing, because they thought, this is a great way to get cause awareness, and just teach people on, this incredible event that's happening around a very harsh issue. And I think it was successful that way. So, oh, somebody else is entering. I'm going to let somebody else in since I have the control right now. There's so many other projects at Urban that are incredible, but I really feel like this was the one that where I started feeling more comfortable with using traditional practices, using cultural practices, spiritual practices within more of a contemporary art context or settings. And, just realizing that there is a place for that in art, and how can we, utilize that in a great way without being disrespectful or people thinking we're not honoring these cultural important practices that are, so vital to our culture. So, and then I'll just do one more quick one, and then I'll pass it over to my colleague, Alan. And I'm just trying to remember. Oh, this is the most recent one. And so, like I said, I just moved here to Santa Fe. And so once again, I live in a city where there is a lot of people going in and out of the city, both from Canada and the States, and just learning more about our more American cousins, if you will. So there's a lot of artists that come through here. And with Indian art market, it's like, I don't know, the art world's a little more driven by commercial aspects rather than so much, like we're lucky in Canada that we get so much great funding that we can have these independent practices, but a lot of artists have to count on really selling their work immediately. So, so it's interesting learning this other side of the art world down south here. But I was invited to do a group show, and it's on display right now at the Denver University, the Vicky Meyer Gallery. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can bring this up one more time. It might not come up. Let's see, maybe I should open. Okay, let's try that instead. Sorry, everybody. There we go. Great. So, after running an organization, it was nice to kind of step back and have some slower time. I feel like working at the gallery, it's like, eight exhibitions a year, special projects, and then we got to make sure there's writing out or websites up to date and all this stuff. And then of course with COVID, it just went all crazy. So it was a lot in the last 2 years. And then just moving here, it's been nice to kind of like take a step back, have a breather, and just think about like, what is it that I'm interested in curating now? And I had this opportunity to work with the Vicki Myron Gallery at the Denver University. And they were already kind of working with this idea of Indigenous feminisms. And I was like, well, what does Indigenous feminism look like to me? And it really came back to about honoring women, sometimes gendered feminine. Some of the artists have transitioned to they, or one has transitioned to him. So TJ Cunhand, I'm talking in particular. So it was like really, for me, it was about like choosing all these works that are really powerful that I've seen over the years. And some of them bridge on spirituality, but some of them, are bridging on, like looking at sexism and all that stuff, politics, economies, land issues. So it was like a really big kind of overarching look through this idea of like all these artists who've created incredible works. And it's just been really interesting to hear the response to it. This is Danger we're looking at right now. Just like I feel like for me, like this group show, I'm really proud of it just because I had the time to get to know the works, to like research it and talk with people. But also just because just what everything that all these artists were portraying of whether their social realities and their cultural practices. So the piece on the right here, the installation, is from an artist in Colorado. Anna Sularkis, I think I'm saying her last name incorrectly, but so there is this idea of using the traditional hand game, as well as using storytelling. It just was like a really kind of diverse look at this. And I really feel like even though it's so gendered, I just really had this idea of like, there's still this idea of spirit and spirituality within each piece that I just feel like it was really, really amazing works that I haven't had the chance to work with some of these artists. So it was like getting to know the artist all over again. Oops. I'll let somebody else. So the third person I'm letting into the to the talk here. Rebecca Belmore, she did a performance for us as well, which was incredible. She had people crying again, she usually does. But also we just kind of looked at like where it's situated, where the university is situated. And, there's the awful history of just weird decimation of the cultures or the nations surrounding Denver as well. So there's so many like connections that I just felt like that happen in the States as well as like happen within Canada. So, but yeah, just having this impact also on the university culture, on the city of Denver. People were just really kind of blown away by all these works. And for me, it felt like these are the type of programming I'm used to doing in Canada. So, so I feel like there's still a really great opportunity to do these kind of incredible exhibitions and, have meaning and also make an impact on the communities that are in the States as well. So that's it in a nutshell. I will pass it on now.
Thank you so much. And well, yeah, what a crisscrossing of the land done in so many different places and lots to inspire conversation. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you, Alan. Thank you, Daina.
Hello, my name's Alan Greyeyes, and I'm my mom's from Seguin, my dad's from Peguis, grown up in Winnipeg, and I work right now. I am the festival director for the Sageway Festival. I started my career in the music industry back in 2005, working at Manitoba Music. And before then, I spent a lot of years promoting shows on my own and with some of my friends and losing a lot of our own money. And then, in the early 2000s, figured out how to access grants and managed projects. And so it's been a long career, and I've loved the music industry, mostly because it's so fast, it moves so fast, and I'm always learning. And I think like right now, along with the festival, I also help the Northern Cree Singers with their business, along with a new singer-songwriter out of Bella Coola named Kaylee Watts. And so again, I feel like my role with them as a helper is I have more questions than answers oftentimes too. And so we're kind of just working together to figure out the best way to release music, best way to build audiences and build tour routes. And I think like one thing that I learned helping out with the Canadian Live Music Association's Closing the Gap study is that I'm not on my own. I'm not like a lot of people are in my situation where we work in the arts, we work in music, and we're forced to do multiple jobs because there's just not enough support to make ends meet. And I really feel that our Canadian counterparts in music especially have a significant head start on us. And this touches on a bit on cultural policy, in that these organizations, these folk festivals, music festivals across the country, art centers, they were able to access operating grants back in the 80s and 90s. Unfortunately, our parents at the time were not, especially here in Manitoba, we're not launching careers in the arts. We're not forming arts organizations. And so myself as a second generation arts administrator here in Manitoba, I didn't inherit an organization with an operating grant, and it's been an uphill battle trying to build capacity and compete with our non-Indigenous counterparts for public support, but also private support. I feel like since we don't have the same level of operating grants, we don't have the same ability to hire staff, means that we also can't make promises to corporate sponsors well in advance of our festival dates like our Canadian counterparts can. And so that's one of the main disadvantages or strategic advantages that our counterparts have on us. And I mean, we're a community, but at the same time, we're all kind of fighting for the same resources. And I think yeah, I think Kevin mentioned, like, or maybe you didn't mention this, maybe I'm paraphrasing, but we need a seat at the table, but we also need the ability to build our own tables. And that's what I'm really fighting for. And I think like I also see myself as a transitional generation. I think we're like the people, myself and the people around me are doing some really great things, but we're really trying to build a foundation for the people who follow in our footsteps to do incredible things. And I really think that's when the change is going to come. We've seen an incredible change at Canada Council. We went from $20,000 a year maximum to, and one deadline a year, to multiple deadlines for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so I think within this one life, within my generation, at least, I've seen a significant change for the better. And that's given us the ability to do a lot more. And I think I'll just touch on my start at Manitoba Music. And again, I guess I'm not a lot different, but I'm a little different in that I usually approach things from the economic standpoint or the business standpoint. And I did a BA at Trent University majoring in economics. And so, and then working at Manitoba Music, it's a music industry association, which is mostly concerned with the economic input and business development and export. And so with the launching of the Cease Festival, a lot of it was around that as well. I feel like my counterparts out east and out west often have more artistic themes to the festival programming they pursue or they deliver. And for myself, it's more, I guess like a good way to put it is that Indigenous families are at the core of every decision we make at the festival. And that means that when I'm submitting a performance offer to an artist, I'm asking myself, is this gonna make their family stronger, or is it gonna create some financial stress for them? Is it gonna make it hard for them to make ends meet in that given week? And so, I mean, yeah, I think it's a really important way to approach the arts and our programming and the way we support artists, but also the people that work at our festival. I often feel like in Winnipeg especially, volunteering is a luxury that most Indigenous families can't afford. And so instead of asking people to come and volunteer at a festival, we paid them at least $20 an hour, along with time and a half for anything over 8 hours. And I think it's really important. Like, and even when we do that, we see a lot of our production assistants not able to make it on any given day. And so we're often hiring more or contracting more people than we need. And it's specifically because, like, we understand, like, Indigenous families have been destroyed. And sometimes our production assistants, sometimes people working at the festival or helping out, they've maybe had to deal with a lot of trauma the night before, or they're still dealing with trauma while we're running the festival. And so it doesn't mean they're unprofessional. It just means that, you know, we understand the realities that Indigenous families are going through here. And I think, like, I oftentimes, before I speak, I often acknowledge my mom too, because I feel like I learned through the Michelle Latimer controversy that, you know, it's people can operate at a high level if they don't have as much trauma to deal with. And the only reason that I'm able to operate at a high level is because my mom handles all of the trauma in our family. And so if there's people getting, like, a relative getting arrested, or people needing a place to stay, or there's violence, you know, they go to my mom. And so I'm definitely insulated from that. And that's the reason that I can, like, stay up writing grants all night, or stay up entering CADAC information in that horrible website. And so, yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge my mom. And the other cultural policy, I'll just say this in closing, like, the other things that we're dealing with in music specifically, along with the operating grants, is the fact that competition powwows aren't eligible for support from the Department of Canadian Heritage. Prize money, I don't think, is an eligible expense for most arts councils. And so we don't have the nationwide network of events, powwows specifically, that could be supporting music is not as strong as what the folk festival experiences here in Canada, or the jazz festivals or indie rock festivals. And so we have a long way to go in a big battle. I think I've been raising that concern for a good 10 or 15 years now. And the other thing that we struggle with at the festival is the importance of food at any Indigenous event. And for us, like, food expenses for feasts are not an eligible expense either. And so there's still a long way to go on the policy side. But yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that. I've got a lot more to say, but we can get into the discussion part of the panel. It'd be good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I love that about acknowledging your mom. And yeah, it gets me thinking a lot about that as well, what we carry, and yeah, who has a lighter load in terms of accessing and doing the grant writing and all of that. Like you say, it's such a huge amount of work. All right, yeah, let's do that. Thank you so much, Alan and Daina and Kevin, and let's get into some conversation, thinking again around the theme of cultural policy, but also some of the really amazing things that have been raised around sovereignty and access. I do want to acknowledge a poor use of word that I used at the beginning in my little intro, and what I meant to say was that I can be a little bit thick, I guess, when it comes to understanding cultural policy. So I apologize for my poor choice of words. Yeah, I am still trying to figure out what it means, but I think what I have witnessed at the city, and maybe as a good example, couple examples that you all raised, Daina, even the simple thing about being able to smudge in a space, you know, with all of the rules now around smoking and that kind of thing. That is something that staff, Indigenous staff at the city, have raised as, you know, part of UNDRIP actually, but as looking at, you know, how can staff be able to smudge, or let's look at, you know, policies that make it so that people can't smudge in their own homes because of fire regulations and that kind of thing. And then other examples that I think about relate to, I guess the biggest question I'd love to ask all of you right now is that kind of distinction about, you know, do you work within that institution? So, you know, the the national colonial theater institution, and then make those changes within that, you know, a seat at the table idea, or do you look at those self-determined spaces and those self-determined systems that are very much reflective of Indigenous ways of doing things, which of course, even within that, there's still all kinds of regulations that we have to contend with. So even if you kind of try to make your own path, you know, you still have, there are still constraints. But I'm just wondering on that note at the very beginning of just further reflections from all of you around, you know, how to do that, how to create these sort of self-determined programs or spaces or systems while still being dependent upon accessing funding and space and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I kind of have a follow-up question and for Daina and Kevin, and it's around sovereignty, because I remember like a couple of years ago, we were just kind of struggling or kind of learning about the idea of defining ourselves as a sovereignty affirming group in music as opposed to an equity seeking group. And I struggled for a long time. I remember I read Jesse Wente's book, in which he talks about narrative sovereignty. And so I think, Kevin, you mentioned that, and maybe Daina, if you have anything that you could touch on for what sovereignty means in your practice.
Well, those are some big questions.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just jump in and just try to talk about some of the work that I've been doing in both my company Savage Society and at the National Arts Center Indigenous Theater. And then out of that, I'll try to address the idea or how I view cultural story sovereignty, cultural sovereignty, the sovereignty of Indigenous artists. At the National Arts Center, this Indigenous Theater Department is a new inclusion after 50 years of this, of Canada's National Arts Center existing. Interesting enough, the very first English language play that was ever produced at the National Arts Center was The Ecstasy of Rita Jo, which was written by a settler, but it was about Indigenous realities in the downtown East Side. If you ask the artists who were in it, like Chief Dan George or Leonard George or August Schellenberg, they would say that they contributed quite a bit to the writing of that piece. But that was not an Indigenous play. That was a play written and directed by settlers that included Indigenous artists as a part of that. And it is sort of, but it was considered the seminal Canadian play. It was the play that sort of put Canadian theater sort of out there as this is its own distinct thing in amongst American theater, British theater. And so, but for me as an Indigenous theater creator, Indigenous theater artist, storyteller, Indigenous theater or Indigenous story sovereignty, you need to have Indigenous artistic leadership. It needs to be created through the lens of an Indigenous artist. And so for us at the National Arts Center, that's work that is either directed by an Indigenous artist, written by an Indigenous artist, or Indigenous co-creation or co-production. So an Indigenous company, an Indigenous artistic leadership is co-creating a work before we would even look at engaging that work on our stages. And so that's how we lens what Indigenous sovereignty looks like for the National Arts Center Indigenous Theater Department. Now, on the other side, Savage Society, it's the same sort of ethos, right? The same sort of idea. We work with Indigenous artists that we have a relationship with. And so it's often artists who've been incorporated into the company through a project or through other work that we then go, hey, what else are you interested in pursuing? What do you want to do? And then we as a company get behind them and support that work going forward. So whether that's a play or whether that's a music series or whether that's a film, we as a company just sort of help them achieve their vision. But that engagement comes out of a relationship that grows. And so it's not just like, we don't just take submissions from all over the place, it's a relational situation. No, though, in terms of like how do you be included in a colonial institution like the National Arts Center versus how do you be an Indigenous theater company like Savage Society. So Savage Society has a board, just like any professional theater company is you know, that has to, like, we're also a charity, so that we can accept donations and things like that. So we've done all of the hoops that we are told that we have to jump through, we have done. But my board has a majority Ntlaka'pamux membership. And many of them are Indigenous Ntlaka'pamux, like, women. And so the value set that we have to go through Robert's rules and all that bullshit, just like any board. But the converse, like for both of my companies, both the NAC Indigenous Theater and for Savage Society, feasts are a line item in our budget, right? And so what I always tell, like, people who are beginning to form their own companies, you can define what your priorities are as an organization at that budget level. You prioritize your budget to be able to accommodate your value set, right? You still have to do all of the things, you know, you have to have like an audit and all that stuff, like all theater companies have to go through their financial audits and all that nonsense, you know, all of that stuff, which I'm so grateful that I have really smart people who deal with the administration part of that, because I could do it. It's just so painful. And so having a really good team behind me in both these companies is really, I'm really so grateful for. But I've always looked at this brand new nascent Indigenous theater department at the National Arts Center. We haven't even got through a full season yet before we got nailed by COVID. But this is just the beginning. It's a startup, and I've been here for 5 years, and it's a startup. But really, it's also just a stepping stone, because I have been advocating for 15 years that we need our own spaces. We need our own, again, it's like I go back to, you know, I started Savage Society because I was tired of begging to be included. And nobody was, you know, I was always having to be on their agenda to do my work, right? As opposed to having our own ways and being in our own agendas that we want to, you know, do in our own way. I think that like the National Arts Center was created out of the Massey Commission, right, which established all of the art spaces, all of the cultural spaces across the country. And if you read the Massey Commission, which came out of after the Second World War, like in the 50s, it is brutal. It is violent against Indigenous arts and culture. It is condescending, to say the least, and encouraged away Indigenous arts practice in its very foundation. And so all of these art spaces that we, you know, like the National Arts Center, the National Gallery, all of the regional theaters, they come out of this sort of nation building project out of the Massey Commission. And we were, of course, left out and discouraged from practicing our art. And so when we talk about redress, when we talk about reconciliation, which it's not a word that I'm super comfortable using, because reconciliation implies that there are two parties who are at fault that need to reconcile. And I think really what it's about is reclamation and reparation. And I think that in the repairing of what was destroyed, we need to really have concrete, serious investment in cultural spaces for Indigenous arts practice, and yep. across Turtle Island, coast to coast to coast. In the north, they don't have an art space. They don't have a gallery space. They don't have a performing arts space in the north, like in Nunavut. And so you know, and not just like a monolithic art space. We don't need like one Indigenous art center. We need like a constellation of art centers across the country that support and can in a healthful Indigenous sovereignty-centric way support Indigenous artists in the lands where they're from. And I think that you know, we can build all these big theaters. I mean, it's nothing for a municipality for, well, it's not nothing, but it happens all the time where we need a library, or we need a new Coliseum, or we need a new theater, or this theater, oh, this new theater over here, this company got a $24 million new theater. It happens doesn't happen like this, but like it happens a lot more easier than it happens for us, right? And I think that when we talk about sovereignty, when we talk about reconciliation, I think we have to talk about like the spaces we've been excluded from, and maybe we don't need to be there. Maybe what we need is our own spaces where we bring our own value sets, and that's how we build it from the ground up, from this land up, those spaces, and with embodying our values. And so, anyways, that's just to say that I've even when I was taking this job, I was like I said right in the interview, I think this is a step towards something that is much more embodied and much more Indigenous centric. That being said, it's an important place to be able to help shepherd work in and out. Shepherd's a bad word, but help guide and support Indigenous work to be here. I think it's important to be able to tell Indigenous stories right across from Parliament Hill in their colonial art castle. And I think that with Savage Society, it's the opposite. Savage Society doesn't have a venue, doesn't have a space. Our model has been to partner with larger organizations who have capacity to do our work, and to get them to sort of foot that labor, so that we're able to do our work in those spaces, but also be able to do our work outside of those spaces. And I'm very fortunate to be able to work in both of those models at the same time, which is, which I think tends to, especially in this space at the NAC, it helps to inform everything that we do in this space, because it is so rooted in community and values that are based from there. So, I mean, I know this is a forum on urban Indigenous, and so the other aspect of that is that at the NAC, it being this big art colonial castle, fort, if you will, it has a kind of vibe that says, fuck you, we do art, piss off. Like, it has that real, and they've done a lot of work to open that up. And so like they did this massive, again, lots of money. And so like they did a massive renovation, and it's beautiful. The other aspect of that, at the same time that they opened up the building with these new renovations, is they had us as an embodied part of the building. And so immediately for me, the role for this department is to make this space safe for Indigenous people, Indigenous audiences, and Indigenous artists. And so, and also to let them know that this is their space, and this is, you are welcome here. This is your space, you belong here, and to not feel that that they're excluded, that they don't belong in a space like this. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is making it comfortable for Indigenous people who live in the city or who are in Kitigan, Zibi, or the local Indigenous folks to feel that this is a safe place for them. And so we do things like, we have an Indigenous art market 4 times a year. That is one of the most popular and successful things that we do here. We had like 5,000 people roll through, and just like a powwow, we have like stalls set up with all of the Indigenous artists that do the powwow circuit. And they sell their tables out by noon. We open up at like 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's just packed. And then they're like beading, and people are trying to buy their like unfinished beading work before the day's over. We have one coming up really soon. And so it's doing things that the building isn't accustomed to doing, that we are as Indigenous folks, and making that a safe space. I think one of the best compliments that I ever received in our time being here is like an 18-year-old Indigenous urban youth being like, writing a comment saying like, the NAC is a safe place for me now, because we're here, because of the work we're doing. We have a Rebecca Belmore sculpture out here that is just stunning in the lobby, that is like enormous, powerful, that is again a representation of that history here, that is representative of the value sets of the Algonquin people, and the medicine power of the copper and the jingle dress and the eagle, and the trees that used to stand here at the NAC. And so there's a lot of transformative work on the inside that's happening, right, in these big institutions. On the other flip of the spectrum with Savage Society, it is really grassroots. It's about like supporting up and coming Indigenous artists, or supporting the artists that are already in their art practice, but are often, that we have a relationship with, that maybe, they don't feel comfortable going to the arts club, or they don't feel comfortable going to the Fire Hall Arts Center. They want to do something that is with us because we don't have to translate the value set. We're already there with them. And so, and we do work in community as well. And so, I don't know, I'm yammering on now, but I think just to say that there's a lot of work there. And I think that there's so much work to be done yet. The cultural infrastructure, the Indigenous cultural infrastructure in this country is really suffering. And I think that we really need, like, across the board, federal and provincial and local regional support for Indigenous cultural infrastructure, because that's the piece that we're always homeless. We're always begging to be in spaces that don't belong to us.
See, my experience is a little different with spaces, and because we started out with our festival in like nice concert halls and stuff. And then I learned that like Indigenous youth don't feel safe going to other neighborhoods. And so instead of asking them to come to us, we started to take the music to them. Yeah. And then we went from hundreds of people to thousands of people using that model. It's definitely a lot more accessible. But I wanted to, like, Daina, you were here in Winnipeg and you had urban shamans, so you were asking people to come to you. Like, what, like having a space, like if you could redo that whole business model for urban shaman, how would you do it? And sorry, I got more questions than anything.
You're right. This is
I like asking questions.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I mean, because they are going through a new space, a whole process right now. Urban Shaman is in the midst of working with a developer, a city developer, to create their new gallery. And it sounded like it was well on its way to, all the things that we demanded, that we wanted, that we're not getting out of that they're not getting out of the current space now, which is, physical accessibility. It doesn't exist right now. Just to have like an environmentally safe place for the art because of temperature controls and dust and things like that. It's just like there was a whole bunch, like a list of things that we felt was really important to the art, keeping of the art safe, but also, of like being able for our community to feel welcome, and that it was that's a really good space. Being on the ground level was number one important to me, but I think since then it has changed now, and unfortunately I think they're going back to a second level, being on located on the second level of this new building they're creating. So it's things like that are really frustrating, because we want our elders to be able to access the space really easily. They can't get up those few stairs, even up to the elevator where the gallery is located now. And just like, once again, coming back to like smudging and things like that, like it was just great that we had our own, that there was like this segment off the main building that would be like soundproofing, and just being able to have it well ventilated so that we can smudge and we can also paint in the space and not get sick from it. So things like that, and yeah, unfortunately, I guess it's turning around, which it's kind of disappointing to hear. But hopefully, they'll stick to some of the things that we really demanded for the gallery to be what we really want it to be, like the ideal space, art space. So but just thinking about it, like in terms of where I'm located now, like, even though it's an art institution and it's government funded and they have to adhere to those standards of their funding and how that gets supported, it's really amazing to be located in an art institution that's just fully designated for, like, with an Indigenous perspective. It is like communities I haven't worked with before, so I don't completely know their cultural backgrounds and practices, but being able to, like, every once in a while smell like smudge come floating into my office, and I'm like, hey, somebody's smudging this morning. I'm like, dang, I want to go find them and get in on that. But you know, like, and just having, like, there is non-native instructors, there's non-native students, but that isn't the overlying contemporary arts culture that happens at the Institute. So there is a larger focus on traditionally based arts, which I think is really interesting, and it's given me a deeper appreciation for all these practices that come from community from way back. And yeah, they're still kind of mixed within the contemporary art scene. So yeah, I think it's really nice to be in an institute where that's like the focus is very shifted. So I'm not sure if that really answered your question or not, but
Well, I just wanted to add something back to the Kamala's original question about sovereignty and my kind of follow-up. And like, again, I was first introduced to the idea of narrative sovereignty by Cease Wyss in the Indigenous Screen Office. And then I saw them get $40 million over 3 years for an allocation from the federal government. And I believe it was based off of a per capita calculation. So I think Indigenous people represent 5% of the Canada's population. So we should be entitled to 5% of the arts funding. I think that was the kind of basic idea. And again, sovereignty in my mind is tied to money. When we have access to the resources, we can make our own decisions and really set a course for our future. And so I thought that was interesting to have the per capita formula used to extract resources, or not to extract resources, but to get a share of the resources. But for me, what I've come to kind of want is not the per capita formula, but going back to the original intentions that are expressed in the Two-Row Wampum Belt, and that we're two separate societies, two separate cultures, and sharing the resources equally, having an equal share to the resources, and the ability to to set our own course. And I think that's the same kind of idea that's behind the Dish with One Spoon Treaty as well. Is equal access to the resources and leaving enough for the people following in your footsteps. And so, again, for me, sovereignty being tied to money is more about not a per capita formula, but an equal share of the resources. And I often reflect on the idea of land back. In music, we have a lot of artists who have songs called land back. There's probably a couple of record labels called land back, and t-shirts, lots of land back t-shirts and earrings. And I not recently, but I guess I learned that a while ago that 89% of the land in Canada is publicly held. So only 11% is privately owned. And so we're asking for land back. We're asking for the Canadian government to give it back, not wealthy homeowners, not Tim Horton owners, not national art centers or banks. We're asking for access to that 89% that's not privately owned. And so I don't think it's an unreasonable request, and maybe it is actually, but that's the request that I'm going to make when it comes to sovereignty, that we get an equal share. And 40 million is 5%. I can only imagine what, I guess I could do the math, but I'm not going to do it right now, but what that 50% would mean for the arts community in Canada. And then I also wanted to touch on the idea of cultural spaces really quickly. And I remember I saw Dr. Sarah Diamond speak, and she's at OCAD now. She talked about the idea of art deserts, and she tied it to food deserts. And so I think if you're in a poor community, a poor neighborhood, you don't have access to fresh produce. You're just going to the corner store, the convenience store. That has a really negative effect on your physical well-being. And so if you're eating Chester fried chicken all the time, you're drinking Slurpees, you're going to be obese, you're going to have more susceptible to diabetes and high blood pressure, and all these incredibly bad physical outcomes. And I think the same goes for art deserts. When you're in a poor neighborhood and you don't have access to the arts, you don't have access to cultural programming, that's going to have a negative effect on your mental well-being. And so that's one of the main arguments that we use to take music to different neighborhoods in Winnipeg, so that, you know, these families have at least one opportunity a year, if not more, to experience the same arts, I guess, to have the same arts experience as our counterparts in suburban Winnipeg.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think gets me thinking a lot. Like when I think about heritage, cultural heritage, and there's all kinds of different areas where people are like, oh, okay, now we have to like acknowledge Indigenous people, and a lot of the kind of pushback that we see. What some people I think are more comfortable with is this idea of adding. They think, okay, well, we'll just add. We'll add an Indigenous acknowledgement. We'll add a room. So yeah, really deepening and going beyond that, I think is what we're seeing happening. So I really appreciate, importance of redress as opposed to reconciliation, of reparations, of reclamation. And so I think a big part of the work is impressing upon non-Indigenous people the responsibility to do this. So yes, it's about an equal share, and it's also about redress and reparations for the damage. And so how do we kind of help people who can see that it's not just about, oh, I need to listen to Indigenous stories, the kind of trauma stuff that some people are looking to, but it's actually about supporting self-determined Indigenous expression in whatever ways that looks like, and that even if it's just for Indigenous people, not for non-Indigenous audiences, that the mainstream colonial society still has a responsibility to fund that, to support that, to make space for that. So yeah, just thinking about like what can help, what have you witnessed that has helped people understand that there's work to do, and that there's redress to do. And if I can just quickly share, the Vancouver UNDRIP strategy just came out and has been approved, so I can share, this is publicly available. Just some examples, there's many, there's like 79 calls to action, but there's lots that relate to culture. This is just one section. But this recognition that, Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh as the host nations, who's, the rights and title holders of the Vancouver area, that the city has a responsibility to support cultural institutions that were displaced or destroyed through colonization, including land-based. So the recognition that there are art practices and cultural practices that have been here for thousands of years, and they've been damaged, displaced, destroyed. And then also, so then when the city goes and funds or creates space for a huge music center that's going to be down in False Creek, and there's no dedicated space or involvement to make sure that that building and that space and the programs reflect the music making traditions of those lands and the people, and the many urban Indigenous people as well. So how do you get into people's mindsets that it's part of, it's not just something you add on, it's not just something you make a little funding stream for, but that it's comes from the land, it's that people have a responsibility to make sure that it continues. If you have thoughts on that.
I feel like I've been saying the same things for the last 15 years and nobody's listening. So I'm not the best to provide advice on advocacy, I think, but I do try to work hard to educate the artists that I have connections with or relationships with, because I believe that every stage gives us an opportunity to educate hundreds, if not thousands, of Canadians. And we're taking the stage weekly, if not nightly. And so that's kind of the way that my messages, I feel, like get amplified, is if I can make a really succinct arguments for an artist to share on stage. I think that's a great way of doing it.
Yep, that's leading to the shifts and transformation for sure. All the work that you're doing, I believe it's a big part of that.
Yeah, just because I feel like I'm really, well, I'm in the middle of American culture. And so it's like, I feel like there's a big movement in Canada to indigenize organizations, and whether that's happening successfully or if it's kind of just haphazardly put together and somebody's getting thrown in as the only Indigenous person in an institution, that kind of sucks for them, not to have that support of community around them. But I just feel like with a lot of the work and a lot of the things I learned at Urban was, the importance of language, and, we really tried to make an effort to, translate our like the print materials, the text artist statements, curatorial statements into the Indigenous language of the artist if they wanted it. We didn't push it. I mean, we really wanted them to feel comfortable in how they wanted their exhibition promoted and publicly presented to people. We made a lot of mistakes too, because we're not fluent in all those languages, but we gave it a good shot. And it's something I brought into the programming I did for the group show I just did in Denver. And so this was like totally new to them to have like the curatorial statement translated into Arapaho. And we had people from the community open the exhibition, which had never happened before at the gallery. So it was really great to see like how the community really responded to that and was appreciative of the fact that, now they are getting the acknowledgement and they're getting space made within, kind of an uncomfortable environment, but, like it's making these small steps towards like kind of, I guess, indigenizing programming there, which, I mean, it's very white-based institution. So, all the monuments and the statues on the campus are all like based on, academic people who are non-native from way back in the day, and they're wealthy white people. So, just having that kind of balance of bringing other ideas into it and really, really acknowledging the communities that exist there. So,
what I noticed about the document for the UN DRIP document that you shared is the emphasis on removing barriers. And I think that the removal of barriers is an important job for anybody in any art space, especially in art space that is like mostly white, it's particular for Indigenous folks, for all kinds of other communities to be there, because often those spaces are really geared and focused towards serving that really the sort of white Canadian audience, and even today, and there's been a lot of effort in the last few years to begin to transform that. But you see in many cities, you see these institutions that have been upholding that value set for a really long time, and so there is an aversion to those spaces for folks who aren't from that demographic. And so one of the things that we do here, we started the All My Relations ticket, which is like a $15 ticket for any of our shows. And you just have to, you say, I'm Indigenous. You don't have to have a status card. Just go to the box office, say I'd like an All My Relations ticket, and there's no questions asked. And really, from my perspective, that's just about like, I don't care about your blood quantum. I just want you to come and see our shows, because seeing the shows is where the transformation happens. So seeing the shows, seeing the representation is where the learning and all of this work that policies are trying to, government policy making and all this arts policy talk is trying to address. It's all in the work. All of the things that we're struggling with is literally in the work of the artist. And if people don't encounter that work, that transference doesn't happen, that energy shift doesn't occur. And so just getting, we have so many, another thing that we do here is at the NUICC is we have a ton of free programs, ton of like unticketed free events, or if you get a ticket, it's like a zero amount ticket for all kinds of things. We do like beading workshops. We do, we have a thing, powwow workout, where it's like an hour-long we have like fancy dancers like leading workout classes in the public spaces, and like it's like the hardest workout ever, man. It's so awesome. But things like that just get people familiar with the space and comfortable with the space and realizing that it belongs to them. Again, breaking down the barriers, and that goes both ways. That breaks down the cultural barriers between the non-Indigenous folks about Indigenous culture, and it gives them an avenue to learn. It gives them a way to sort of like, oh, this is, they get to encounter the values that we carry, and able to sort of embody that idea of, supporting, reparation, supporting redress, supporting these initiatives, and understanding us a little better. At the same time, we get to like celebrate ourselves and celebrate the beauty of our artists. And so I just clocked that barrier busting and sort of focus is really important.
Yeah.
I also want to mention I have a theory that the high dropout rates here in Manitoba, at least, and I'm guessing it's the same with Indigenous communities across the country. The high dropout rates kind of indicate that Indigenous people don't always do really well in classrooms. And so I think when we as arts presenters, and especially in music, because concert halls are set up like classrooms, when we present the arts that way, we're alienating a big part of the Indigenous community who wants more participatory arts experiences. I remember I read a book on participatory arts and they didn't mention the powwow at all. But for me, the powwow is one of the most participatory ways you can present the arts. Because as an audience member, you can sit in the stands, you can go stand by the drum if when they're singing, you're free to dance and intertribal, you're free to get up and walk around and buy food or beadwork or anything. And so, I mean, I often feel bad about, I like the idea of taking music to these neighborhoods, but I also feel bad about the idea that I'm forcing them to sit in a classroom style presentation. Because that, to me, again, that seems like one of the biggest barriers we're facing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a thing about like colonial, like in the theater world, like and even theater, like the concept of theater is a European concept, right? It's like and it's separate. So like there's like music is separate from dance, is separate from theater, and there's forms that blend the two, but there's a sort of a distinction in the even like forever in the funding bodies, right? Whereas Indigenous folks, it's like if there's a song, there's a dance. If there's a dance, there's a story, right? Like it's all sort of intertwined. But even in the presentation of theater, it comes in the proscenium form, right? Like you sit in an audience that's separate and elevated, like the stage is separate and elevated from the audience, and you just receive that. But often in our storytelling forms, it's in a circle, it's in the round, it's in a big hall, where you know, your families are sitting together, like on the West Coast, or in our tradition that no longer is being practiced these days, which I would really, in my lifetime, I would love to see the reversal of, is we used to have a big pit house, a big shishkin, a communal shishkin, where our winter ceremonies would be performed and then be done. And it's a big circle with the fire pit in the middle, right? And so we're all looking at each other and we're seeing the work, and it's like the work happens down in the middle there. So in the work that we do as Savage Society, often when we do it in the community, we do it outside, and we do it in that format where the audience is in amongst the show, as opposed to being separate from it and removed.
Yeah, thinking about the space themselves, and so it blows people's minds here, at least in Vancouver, that there isn't yet that kind of longhouse, big house space. Eventually it's happening now as the nations have to like purchase their own lands. There's plans for a cultural center finally that will be sort of accessible to everybody. So yeah, different ways of experiencing and expressing it in that more holistic way. I love that idea. And the barriers in general, I appreciate the focus on that too, because, you know, it's like when it comes to funding and all the different ways that I've noticed that the funding requirements and the application process has really changed quite a bit. And I know the city in response the city of Vancouver has made a lot of changes to its application process and also what's required after. So those are other areas that I think are really important in thinking about barriers. But also for access to land. So depending on where you live and whose territories it is, there's lots of talk now around. So for example, you know, and Cease will probably speak to this, where Cease is, you know, having fires again on her territory. And before that, it would have been, you know, prohibited. And so, you know, accessing places where plants were traditionally harvested and where ceremonies happen, those kinds of things are starting to happen here in Vancouver, as people more and more start to recognize, you know, the deeper traditions and that have been disrupted. So I don't know if people have examples of that, of like radical transformation, even within the city, of cultural practice.
It like, yeah, here in Dana, I think, you know, the Thunderbird House, such a beautiful space downtown, but what they were lacking was admin talent. And so after the initial investment was gone, they didn't have any programming money. And so now it's kind of, it's fenced off because people were stealing the copper from the roof. and it's just not being used at all. It also didn't have any great parking, so it made it really hard. Winnipeg is more of a driving city than anything. And so again, I think for me, that just reminds me of how important admin talent is. And it's probably the #1 deficit we have in music is admin talent in the Indigenous community.
It's the same in, I think, across the board in all of the performing arts.
Totally.
The biggest deficit, and I tell you, if you were an Indigenous administrator, you would never stop working. If you were an Indigenous designer, you would never stop working. If you were an Indigenous stage manager, producer, you would never stop working. And it's like that, those roles we are so desperate for right now, like across anywhere, any organization. We need those filled by Indigenous folks yesterday. Yeah,
I watch a lot of social media controversies, I guess, and people getting called out and stuff. And it's been made apparent to me, at least, is that everyone understands the importance of representation on stage, but we haven't really seen a big push in social media or with public funding for representation off stage. And again, that just speaks to the need for more admin talent in our community.
Yeah, and training and mentoring.
A big part of it is that for so long, these worlds were not accessible to us, right? Like, so why would I put all my energy into going to learn how to be an administrator for an arts organization? That's not something that I encounter very often, right? Like an Indigenous, we've been here for a while, but it's for so long, it's like so many of our folks they're not seeing that path as something that belongs to them,
Yeah, I think for just the whole indigenizing of institutions, whether that's galleries or academic circles, I just it's like there's a big push to have all these people there now. But I mean, not even 10 years ago, I could barely get into the courses to take any of the stuff. So it just seems kind of crazy that, now it's like, okay, now we got to get all these people in here. Like, where are you guys? Like, why aren't you guys like trained, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, you made it pretty difficult for us to get in there. So, yeah.
Great. We're getting close to the end of this session. So I'm wondering if we can just hear some closing thoughts from y'all before we wrap up. Reflecting on these themes in general, or I guess what I think is really current right now and is thinking about the local level and things that urban governments can do, which is a new thing for most urban governments to start thinking about redress and land back and all those kinds of things. But I know a lot of you might work with more national organizations or contexts, so that's totally fine if you want to speak that way. But just if you have any reflections on kind of where you see things going in terms of real self-determination and sovereignty for Indigenous people, even in an urban setting around arts and culture. Maybe we can, well, whoever wants to jump in.
I'll just quickly, I guess mostly just to tie it into what I'm doing currently, which is being the program manager for the artist in residency program here at the Institute of American Indian Arts. What I really value, what my supervisor Laura Evans has done, is like going back to, I guess, accessibility and trying to break down barriers. Is that even the application, even though if they're people that have been professionally doing their career for years, we still made the application process really, really simplified and easy to understand, easy to fill out. And we're trying to be very cognizant of, diversification of nations across the states, but also, we're opening it up, trying to make it easier for Canadians to access this program as well. But I think just being able to have things like that, like what was previously mentioned about, the granting system and applications, and how that's just so hard sometimes for Indigenous communities, because it's just a whole different way, like art speak talk or grant talk that's, not widely known, and it doesn't get, thrown out there of how to understand all these like different ways of applying to something, and all these like terminology that just doesn't exist in Indigenous communities, like the mindset's so different on reserve. You know, there's way different value systems of, you know, just even housing and water. Like, you know, the art kind of is, you know, like third in line of importance in the community, because there's just bigger things that are, you know, the grappling with, or that the community's grappling with. So yeah, so I think that's just trying to make those bridges like a lot easier for Indigenous artists and cultural workers to access better. So
Wonderful. Thank you. Anybody else?
I think I mentioned I'd like us to have half. So I think that's what I would like. But I also like, again, for me, it's such an important part of it is the arts administrators and having a new wave of folks. Like I describe myself as a second generation arts administrator here in Winnipeg. I feel like I learned from Lisa Meaches and Errol Ranville. They're kind of my mom and dad when it comes to arts administration in music. And so, yeah, I'm working hard to find people who are interested in working in the arts and in music specifically. And I remember I shared this one article I found. I'm just going to share it in the chat. It's about a prize for arts administrators, and it really defines what an arts administrator is for me, and it was beautiful. And so whenever I get to talk to younger folks who are interested in working on the business side of music, I try to share that that story or that article, because it's, again, it makes it so romantic, and it does speak to like how important people that work on the business side or the administration side are. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So I want half.
I agree. I want half too. I think having half is key. It's not equal, it's equitable. And I think that it's like it's the same with we don't need equal services to the rest of Canada. We need like services that like actually address our issues, which is more than what normal folks who have more privilege, who have more access, who don't have as many systemic barriers to all these things. We need more in order to be at an equitable level, right? And to repair what has been destroyed. If you were to itemize, if you were doing an audit of what was lost since colonization, yeah, you couldn't count that number. It would be so enormous. Like the gold that was taken, the resources, the timber, the land value itself, like the wealth of this nation was stripped from us. And is still being held. And so you know, this idea that, oh, we just gotta meet the level doesn't cut it. And so we're all working in different ways to just try to get in there and to have, you know, sit at the table or build our own table or have no fucking table and just like have a circle and to do it however we can do it. But we're having to navigate through these systems that have been in place before we arrived, and either blow them up or transform them. And so I'm really looking forward to a day when we have our own spaces all over the country, all over the place, coast to coast to coast, that are embodied with the value set of the people that are from there. And like Alan says, half at least. And the resources, you know, like the resources to really be who we are, to the resources that really address the issues that we face, and the resources to be able to just be excellent, you know, and not have to live in a constant state of scarcity, the scarcity model, just doing what we can with what we got. Because, you know, we look around and we see the colonial, you know, the colonial artists, the colonial structures, the colonial narrative being resourced with, you know, totem poles in the background, or you know what I mean, like as opposed to at the front, that the totem pole is the thing, that you know what I mean, like we need more of that. And I think it's as far as we sometimes feel like we've come in that conversation, we're just so very much at the beginning. And so and yes, more administrators, absolutely.
I just want to also add that, like Kevin mentioned, excellence. I think that's really important, but I think my main goal is also to make sure that the people following my footsteps are free to be mediocre. I don't want them to be spread super thin and having to master so many different parts of the business just to survive. And so again, I look at my counterparts who are non-Indigenous, and they're able to just focus on one job, and it blows my mind. And that's what I want for the people following my footsteps, is the opportunity to be mediocre.
Yeah. And forgive me for using the word, I don't often use the word excellence. Usually the word that I use that I replace excellence with is relevant. So that we do work that is relevant, right? That is, because it can be awesome, just, you know, and still have its problems, but if it's relevant, it'll resonate.
Thank you all. Yeah, I love all of that. And for me, the whole thing of the erasure that we see in the cities, and we're all, you know, working towards addressing that erasure, which is, you know, a direct result of genocide and assimilation and so on. And so everything that you're doing is really helping to address that erasure and uphold the flourishing and the growth and the reclamation, everything that's happening. So I just thank you all for that work. And I do feel hopeful that these shifts are happening, and that healing and reparation is slowly starting to happen. So thank you all for sharing your perspectives, and thanks everyone for listening. I guess you're going to go on to a break and then further conversation, but just really want to thank our speakers. You bring a huge abundance of knowledge and experience and insight. So thank you for sharing. Hi.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Hi.
Oh my God.
Symposium. So taking all this incredible knowledge and the incredible experiences from this collective of professional Indigenous artists, curators, programs, and most of all, the change makers in the Indigenous Arts Commons, it's more apparent than ever that Indigenous people are still waiting for these colonial countries to catch up to Indigenous brilliance and our needs, and mediocre. I want to add that now for Alan. I thought that was a brilliant, it's still brilliant. Even mediocre is brilliant. And our needs for the weight of colonialism to be carried by settlers and to start doing the labor that we have been taxed with carrying, and doing the labor of unpacking in order to be seen and heard in the places we desire to be. So we hope to take this energy and important knowledge forward to our next panel. And we really, I've been so emotional listening to you all speaking, and just knowing, Alan, you're new to me, but your work is not, but just hearing people I just completely admire and the work you do, and thank you for what you do. OCM.
We'll take a 10-minute break, but Chelsey, do you want to give a thanks on behalf of NUICC as well, and thanks to the Heart of the City Festival, Vancouver Moving Theatre in Vancouver, for supporting this work as well this morning?
Yes, definitely. Wanakumak, thank you deeply for the work that you do in being change makers, and making, I think, urban Indigenous people more visible, you know, to all Canadians. I think that's important as well. The National Urban Indigenous Coalition is a group of, especially our National Leadership Council, is a group, as you mentioned, Alan, people who have multiple jobs, need to be experts in multiple spaces. And actually, a lot of our council members do this work as volunteers in terms of advocating on behalf of their Indigenous cities, their provincial regions at a national level. And we're so grateful that you all were here to come and share your stories and lessons to help build a body of knowledge that can help inform groups across other regions and other cities.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
So beautiful.
I just want to throw in a quick plug. We actually have a project on our website called Indigenous Cities that does include the Lower Mainland. And it is a series of, they're all based off stories. Some of them are songs, some of them are spoken words, some of them are like narrative, but they're in Saskatoon, Ottawa and Vancouver-ish, like in the Lower Mainland. So check it out. It's on the National Arts Centre Indigenous Theatre website. It's called Indigenous Cities.
Thanks to Kamala for this beautiful moderating and bringing us, holding space together for these really important stories, and Kamala also for your work on the front lines of defining these blanketing, these decolonizing policy works that you're so involved in the city of Vancouver, that hopefully we can pick up in another conversation. These NUICC governance series events take place on the last Friday of every month. So we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Yeah, bye.